Welcome to Green Chat. My name is Cleeze, and this is a place where you guys can ask me questions and I can give you my opinion to hopefully formulate your own on the upcoming MMO Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen. Today we're going to be covering Quadrinity, an interesting take that VR has taken on its relationship between its character classes. The question is this a good thing for Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen? Is there an ugly side to Quadrinity? And why did some other MMOs, or most other MMOs, shy away from this type of play in favor of Holy Trinity that we're all super familiar with, which is the tank, damage dealer, and healer? I will be covering this in more depth and hopefully give you the information you need to answer these important questions. As I so love saying, let's get started. Alright guys, welcome back to Green Chat, and today, like I just mentioned, we're going to be covering Quadrinity in quite some depth. Not so crazy in what we've done before. We've talked about this before. Obviously, we know what Quadrinity is, but I'm going to talk about more what it means for Pantheon and us as the players. So, a nice young fellow, or a fellow that's nice and young. Dan Vernier said this. He commented on Quadrinity and posted a gigantic wall of text. There's some other questions that if we get to them, I'm going to go over those as well. But the focus will be Quadrinity. Quadrinity. Yeah. So let's get started. I'm just going to skim over his post because it's pretty long. It's like 3 pages of just amazing information. Thank you, Dan, for this, by the way, because this is pretty awesome stuff. And this is his account of playing Vanguard and EverQuest, pretty much. So as we all know, in EverQuest, we're going to start with tanks. So we're going to go over each facet of the Quadrinity and then kind of hone in on how this might be bad for Pantheon, or how Quadrinity has been really bad in the past, and why I think it kind of went away in most other MMOs, because it created an interesting environment that can cause friction between enjoyable play and meaningful play. So we'll see what happens here. See what happens with this game, you know what I'm saying? So I'm acting a little crazy. I changed my setup for my mic, so it feels really awkward. So anyways, yeah, getting into this. So the tanks in EverQuest, as we all know, the warrior was by, or bar none, the best tank in the game. Other tanks were just kind of like little, who knows what they were for? Why did they even make them? They could have not existed in the game, would have run just fine. Every main boss is usually tanked by a warrior. That's just how it went. And then I guess the same thing was happening in Vanguard, and then they started giving stances to all the other tanks. I guess there were Shadow Knights, Dread Knights, Dire Lords, Warriors, Paladins. Were all give different stances, which helped them be fairly equal in the manner of taking, at least in Vanguard, and that helped out there. So they did balance tanks in Vanguard, at least in Dan's opinion. I never played Vanguard, so maybe you guys can comment on that. Were the tanks balanced? I don't know. At least between each other's tanks. Now, the other issue that popped up, and this is a Quadrinity thing. This is really not a Quadrinity thing. This is a subclassing thing. But tanks were able to subclass into DPS, and I guess they were doing kind of close to damage as some of the more frail DPS. So like a rogue, for example, had to work just as hard or harder to even be at the same par as a warrior, for instance, in his DPS stance. And he would take way more damage from abilities and stuff because he's wearing, what, leather? Mail? Who knows? In Vanguard they were wearing, but yeah, so that's just a little example there. But in general, the tanks are sitting in a pretty good spot, at least from what we've seen so far, as far as them being balanced, and they will be strictly focused on tanking and not flipping out to DPS roles and stuff like that. Now, let's jump over to the other roles of DPS, healer, and CC. The healers in EQ and Vanguard were very strong on their own, including CCs, direct damage, all sorts of stuff they could do that made them pretty freaking overpowered, especially when leveling. You could duo over the healer. They could do tons of damage in specific instances. Like clerics could do so much damage to undead, and they could do stuns, which are super vital and super helpful. Druids could kite all day, and they were awesome. Shamans could slow. They had pets, and their slows were so strong. Basically, healers were so strong in EverQuest. Assuming they were also very strong in Vanguard. And in Vanguard as well, you could switch into DPS spec as a healer and be comparable, if not do more damage than most damage dealers. That was their prime role. Like the pure damage dealer roles, like rogue, wizard, summoner, mage. Those guys, would have to compete with healers, or it's not even beneficial to bring them because a healer cannot DPS them. And if you need an extra healer, you can always flip to healer. So there you go. And this is kind of interesting that that was a problem in Vanguard, because that's not really a Quadrinity issue. That's really something else. But in EverQuest, this was also present, and this is, again, Quaternity really hasn't entered the fray yet. We're about to, enter the fray with why Quaternity is potentially a bad thing, and why MMOs probably moved away from this concept as a whole. So, yeah, so healers super strong. We'll have to see how they deal with that in Pantheon. There's not much out there yet on the healers, but yeah, super strong. Next, let's move over to crowd control. So crowd control, as you can tell, is a pretty great tool. And in EverQuest, I can't speak for Vanguard, but in EverQuest, if you had crowd control, like if you were Bard or Enchanter, you were automatically in a group. Like, you were the top pick of every group because you gave slows to the bad guys, which slows them down, makes them attack less, which is huge, or was huge in those games. You increase the speed, haste, movement, everything of your group. I don't think Enchanters gave movement speed. Maybe one of their buffs did, but they definitely gave like weapon speed increase. Like you would attack like crazy faster with an Enchanter in a group, and the mobs were slowed. They were debuffed to the point where it's easier to cast spells on them. Same thing with bards. Bards would buff your melee. They could buff their casters. It was, it was just, there's no reason not to have one in a group if one was available, and you would take it over any other class in the game, and that gave these classes a huge leg up, and they were very strong for this, extremely strong. Mostly though, I would say the CC was pretty much, I don't know if the capital of their awesomeness, because their haste was pretty good too, but in the end, their ability to CC and break up camps and, mez and or crowd control the environment was gigantic, and it really gave them kind of a class of their own to where they can almost do whatever they wanted. Same thing almost with healers. So they can kind of like look down on that community and sit up on their perches, and that kind of sucked for people. And that's one thing that Quaternity kind of does, is it really creates these niches versus Holy Trinity to where these characters can leverage this to do whatever they want sometimes in the past. So finally, we're going to end on Damage Dealer. Basically, they get the shaft in Quaternity because there's more of them than any other class, and probably anyways, and we'll have to see with Pantheon. Maybe there won't be as many people rolling damage, but yeah, you're gonna want any of these other classes over a damage dealer first. You could even take a Bard and an Enchanter to up your ante and still be good. They probably will deal decent damage. That's the other thing, they deal decent damage, and they can also CC and give all these buffs, where a rogue potentially, now I'm not talking about a Pantheon right now, we're about to go through that, but in the past, a Quaternity like this really put a hamper on things because CCers kind of ruled the day, healers kind of ruled the day, tanks kind of got screwed in the sense where warriors were really the only tank, except when Vanguard fixed that problem, and I think Pantheon has already fixed that problem. But yeah, damage dealers were kind of like, yeah, who are you guys? Yeah, come here, little boys, with my little pets. You have your little farm of damage dealers. Granted, it wasn't that bad, it wasn't that crazy, and there wasn't like a evil empire of like Sith Lord enchanters and like Jedi clerics walking around going, "What's up?" But kind of, you didn't want to piss them off. You know what I'm saying? So, hey, that is the kind of environment that was culminated through the Quaternity. Now, if you go over to the Holy Trinity, CC is pushed into all the classes. The healers are able to CC, the damage dealers are able to CC, the tanks are able to CC. Through stuns, through long-term CCs, through traps, stuff like that, they're pushed into those classes. So that was broken up. Now buffs were also pushed into the other classes. So buffs were broken up. Utility was broken up across the classes. You bring a rogue, you bring a warrior, you bring a hunter or a ranger, you get a specific buff, and that's great. And usually those buffs were pretty great. There's a reason to bring them along. And then what else was there? There was the healers were pretty balanced, and they were totally different. Same thing with the tanks. They were totally different, but they were also balanced, usually in Holy Trinity setups. I don't know why that works so easier, but it allows them to, like, if this tank is not that wanted, they can throw something really great at it, like this great CC, or this great area of effect ability, or something like that would usually be utilized by a CC'er, or a utility class, like a buffer, utility / CC'er. And that's really why I think a lot of people moved away from the Quaternity, which is where the roots of the genre, to the now Holy Trinity. All right, so I'm going to round out Dan Veneer's post here. He's still got quite a bit to go as far as information goes, and if you want to check that out, definitely do. It's in last week's comments. But basically, what he's going on about is there's roles to fill in Pantheon. There was roles to fill in EQ and in Vanguard. And many of those roles can be covered by one class. One great example would be the Enchanter. The Enchanter could, for example, cover CC, slows, haste, mana buffer, and DPS. That's 5 different roles out of maybe 8 different roles that you would need in a group. Versus a rogue or a ranger. A ranger, granted, could be a snare, but basically a rogue could do damage. That's what it was like. But what Dan is asking here, which I think is what brings us to the point of this video, really, what is Quadrinity, and, you know, what does Pantheon have planned for it? So Dan's questions are, what roles do we know will be planned in Pantheon aside from Quadrinity? It seems at least snares and slows will be in from what I've read. And what he means by roles is tank, cleric, slower, snare, haste, evacuator, mana buffer, DPS, backup healer, etc. Another question is, what abilities are planned to create the identity for each class? I'm a bit worried about rogues' ability to help each other climb here. It seems to be forced to need a rogue because seems a bit forced to need a rogue because of being unable to access a place without them. Kind of like how you'd rather not have a wizard in EQ, but you might need the ability to evac. It's just a mobility thing that doesn't really affect the running gameplay. I agree. It seems to me as if the plan is to spread out tanking abilities across the tanks and healing abilities across the healers as it was in Vanguard. Are there any plans on having a similar approach to a central crowd control role, or will it be restricted to just an enchanter or bard as it was both in EQ and in Vanguard? Great questions. Let's do this. Let's do this, boys. All right, so let's get to answering these questions as best as I can. Which roles do we have planned for Pantheon aside from Quadrinity? So I'm not sure. Besides Quadrinity, I don't think there is anything outside of that. Maybe your question was more about the roles that the Quadrinity can fulfill, like snares, slows, from what you've read. So basically there will be healing, there'll be tanking, obviously. There will be slows. We already know that from the shaman. And there likely will be snaring, but it may be different than what it was before as far as utilizing snares indoors. I know that was a thing with some classes. And haste, there will be haste. We don't know about evac. There's definitely mana buffers. Enchanters can buff mana or be a mana battery for the most part by dealing damage. Obviously, this can be DPS. Backup healer. Paladins right now have some pretty great heals. We don't know if that really goes through to being a backup healer, like they can sit there and start hard casting heals, or if it's just part of their tank play. I don't think they're going to be able to hard cast. Maybe hard cast. Basically, what hard casting means is you can sit there and spam a healing ability, like as if you were a healer in a backup situation. Granted, you'll burn through probably a lot of your resource pretty quick. Plus, I think a lot of your resource will not be based in mana. It'll be more based in wrath and resilience. Not resilience, that's warriors, but wrath and what is it? Reckoning. And you'll need to be actively tanking to build those up. So I think what we would expect to see from Pantheon is very similar to what was in EverQuest and likely Vanguard as far as the Quadrinity filling out the roles of the group. Now, which abilities are planned to create identity for each class? I'm worried about the rogue's ability to help others climb here. The question I had before basically is his worry is that with Quadrinity, you in the past has really overpowered certain classes like the Enchanter, or healing classes like the Cleric, and then Warriors, for instance, dominated the tanking scene. Basically, these 3 classes alone dominated the game, including Bard. And if you played these classes, now you could see what would happen with a class that would dominate the game. There would be tons of them. So yeah, it's just, you know, got a little out of hand towards the end. And they didn't really get super crazy towards the end. They were great, but they were kind of, you know, they were a niche thing. But they started getting better and better and better. And it just kept going and going and going. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through each class and say what we do know about them as far as what we got going on Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, to hopefully kind of abate or see what they're doing to address this Quadrinity and kind of take the issues that it had with overpowering classes in the past and kind of smoothing out the edges. Now, I would really like to see more on the Enchanter before I give a definite answer, but I'm going to go over what we got so far, and it's kind of a lot, and I was kind of surprised after reading through what we actually already know and what to expect as far as what classes will be capable of doing as far as more along their utility lines and useful things they can do in the group. Now, that being said, things like warriors breaking down walls and rogues dropping ropes, I'd like to put that aside for a second because I don't know if that really has much to do with the Quaternity other than the lore of the class. Like rogues, you know, they can, you always think of a rogue like scaling a tower or a castle wall, and you know, they got like these grappling hooks and all this cool stuff, and the warrior's like, yeah, smashing through walls and doors. So I would like to almost put that in a different category, because you would almost think that any class could do something special, or maybe only those few classes will be able to do that special thing, and we don't even know what that means. Like, does that mean we'll be able to access a very specific area that we won't otherwise have access to with the rogue? Or does the rogue just make it easier for you to climb? Because the rogue will have to climb to this position in the first place to drop the rope. And then wouldn't that also mean that one of the other classes could then also climb that? It just makes it easier, like, oh, we can climb this faster now. Like maybe there's a benefit to climbing something faster. Who knows? I don't know. So kind of want to leave that on the side. So we've already gone through the Paladin, the Warrior, and the Dire Lord. I have pretty in-depth videos on those if you want to check those out in green chat. But as far as the way they're looking is pretty dang balanced. And as far as Quaternity goes, it's pretty solid. Now, they're kind of relying on other people to play with because they're tanks. They're probably not going to deal outlandishly a ton of damage, and rightly so. In the past, the Paladin, the Warrior, and the Dire Lord have done a ton of damage. Not so much the Dire Lord, but the Paladin has done decent damage, and the Warrior has done a ton of damage in other MMOs to make them very self-sufficient to the point where it was pretty ridiculous. Not in early game, not in like early play, but later in the game, either Warriors were so wanted and Paladins were pretty efficient at solo play that it was kind of ridiculous. But I don't think they're going to make it that. They'll probably try to balance them out. And the way the Dire Lord works too, it looks pretty good at soloing or duoing. The Paladin and the Warrior, I think they'll all be evenly matched. Now, with those roles being as a tank, I don't think you'll have any issue with those, kind of bouncing off any other class. In the Holy Trinity and the Quaternity, the tanks are usually going to be the most wanted from any given role. Now, we're moving on to the healers. So the Cleric is going to be very strong direct heals, light hots, and can potentially also bubble characters if there's like to anticipate incoming damage. Shamans will be able to do huge hots, basically, and small direct heals, but their strength, or what it said in the description, is their biggest strength will be that they're going to be able to do light buffs or buff people and then do huge debuffers. It really emphasized on the debuffing ability of the shaman. So the shamans will be able to really lower the effectiveness of the enemies you're fighting and slightly up your character's effectiveness and give you really awesome hots, which is pretty stinking good in most healers. Most people have played a healer. You either have reactive heals, which is more the Cleric direct heals, or the Shaman, which you can preemptively start building your hots across your group if you know something's coming your way. Now the Druid, we haven't seen much on that, but there was speak on maybe like type of a totem type healing, or using the environment somehow to heal. We don't really know much on the Druid yet, but stand by. As far as the Cleric and the Shaman, they look like the yin and yang, and maybe the Druid will be like the actual symbol. You know what I mean? It'll be like the symbol that the yin and yang is painted on. But I'll have to kind of wait and see there. And the healers, as far as that goes, again with the Quaternity, healers are healers, and with the Holy Trinity, you're always going to need healers, at least one in your group. You're always going to need a tank. The real problem you really start hitting is when the DPS start coming in there and the CC. Now, let's move over to DPS and go through this. Now, this is the Ranger. I went through and looked at all the abilities that we know so far. The Ranger can increase physical damage. Just a debuff it can do to enemies. It can interrupt with its abilities. It can CC with traps for up to like 30 seconds. The trap will break if damage is dealt to that target, even though the target is taking damage in the trap from entangling vines. Just if it takes any other additional damage, the trap will break. It can also also has pushback abilities, like you can move them backwards. We don't know how useful that's going to be. A couple of classes have that. So that as far as what we know of the Ranger. Also, the Ranger is super mobile, but for these purposes, I don't think that's that important. So the monk will be a slow casting debuffer, so he can slow the casting ability of certain mobs, make them cast slower. As we all know, he's going to be a great puller with his Feigned Death. He'll also be able to execute stuns. Now, these abilities to pull off will require chakra, which he'll have to build up at certain states, so he won't be able to stun on demand, but if he needs to, he'll be able to do that. He also has a hate reduction, which is more important than most people think. He can also off-tank, so he has a lot of taunting abilities and stuff like that, and pretty good tanking abilities as far as being able to off-tank. He also, along with the Ranger, has pushback abilities. Now, moving on to the Rogue. So basically, some light CC on the Ranger, very light. Nothing crazy in the Monk besides FD pulling, which seems to be his niche, and off-tanking. Now the Rogue has the ability to increase physical damage and poison damage to an enemy. So basically he can debuff the enemy to take increased damage and poison from physical and then magical poison, or physical poison. We'll have to see about that. Probably magic. So maybe Necros can also jump on that poison bus. Maybe some Shaman too. Poison damage. And they can also do aggro reduction. They have an AoE CC with a what is it called? Sleeping powder. Blow a cloud of sleeping powder into the air. The Rogue and all enemies caught in the cloud will be put to sleep for 24 seconds. Any damage will break the effect. Rogues also have single target CC with smoke and mirrors, which smash the vial at the feet of your enemy, releasing a caustic smoke into their eyes and nose, incapacitating them for 24 seconds. Any damage to your target will break the effect. So there we go again. So Rogues will have AoE CC and single target CC. They can also do a pull assist with Flask for greater puller with utility. So I was looking at this pressurized flask. Throw a sealed flask of pressurized air at the target location. The flask shatters on impact, creating a loud noise that draws the attention of nearby enemies for a short time. Now with this, the Rogue can be sneaking or stealth, and then as a patrol's moving, he could break apart patrols potentially with using pressurized flask, which potentially sneaks some Rogue, what do you want to call it, pulling in there, especially in indoors and very tight corners and situations where, you know, hey, let's get a Rogue in there and doing that business. So interestingly enough, Rangers will be able to CC, and Rogues will be able to heavily CC, AoE CC, and single target CC. So right now, if we had a Ranger and a Rogue in a group, you'd be able to potentially CC every pull as much as you wanted. Now, if you screwed up when the Rogue and Ranger is setting up those CCs, that would be a problem, because they probably can't do that every 5 seconds. So are these type of abilities out there. Now, Summoner, Wizard, Necro, and Enchanter and Bard, we don't know anything about at all. We do know the Summoner is going to be more, you know, I want to stay in with basically the utility, or what utility they'll have. We have no idea. The Wizard, and it'll be interesting to see coming up in the future. The Enchanter, we do know, will have definitely some solid CC out there, along with the Bard, and pretty good recovery, probably, you know, mana back from the Enchanter, and probably haste, you know, from the Bard and the Enchanter, a lot like in EverQuest. So we'll have to see about that. But basically, what's interesting to take from this is that they're pushing a lot of the, you know, basically right now, any one class fills 2 roles of the Quadrinity from what they have put out so far. So with the exception to maybe the tanks, not so much, and maybe not the healers. So where the issue was with previous games is where the tanks were balanced against themselves, the healers were balanced against themselves. Now, the DPS were then balanced against the CCers, and the CCers balanced against the DPS. That's where the issue really came about and created lots of friction and problems. So what they have going right now is that the Ranger, Monk, and Rogue will be able to do plenty of CC stuff or off-tanking stuff. So right now, as far as Quadrinity goes and the damage dealers, they fulfill 2 roles. They either have primary damage, slight CC, primary damage, slight off-tank. So we'll have to see where they keep going with this, and this would, in my opinion, really fix a lot of the problems that we had in the past with Quadrinity, and why a lot of games moved away from this. So why did people move away from Quadrinity, and why is Pantheon bringing it back? So I think a lot of people moved away from Quadrinity because it brought a lot of friction, not friction, but maybe like a lot of interdependence, basically, which Pantheon's boasting is going to be a really, you know, strong point, selling point for them, of needing certain classes in your group. You're going to need certain classes to fulfill certain roles, to do certain content. And with that comes a lot of social interaction, trying to find the right people for the right job, and basically having to get along with these people to pull this off. You need more parts to the puzzle to make it work, where in Holy Trinity you need much less. There's a lot more overlap, so you can really play whatever you want to play and not have to look for certain classes to do certain things. Certain classes didn't have the, oh, there's that guy, let's go grab him. Basically, everybody was kind of the same, and able to fulfill most roles while doing those roles differently. Excuse me, I just scratched my little book there. So that's really the, I think where they moved away from it was simplicity, to make the system more simple, and in essence made the system more boring. Where the system is more complex with Quadrinity by a long shot. You have way more classes out there, way more jobs to fulfill, and way more strategies and tactics you can deploy to take down an encounter, but it makes it much more for interesting gameplay and social interaction between players. That's just my opinion. But that's Quadrinity and the Holy Trinity, and why Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, in my opinion, will be doing well with Quadrinity in its future. Alright guys, and with that, we're going to end it there. If you liked what you saw, please consider liking and subscribing and clicking the little bell next to subscribe to get any notifications for future uploads that I do. If you have any questions or comments for me, please leave them in the comments below and I will address them. I really appreciate you guys' comments. Again, I think we're up to now 250 subscribers. Hey guys, I really appreciate your support. It makes me feel like what I'm doing here actually has a purpose and is at least fulfilling some of your guys' needs for that Pantheon Rise of the Fallen addiction. It's not really an addiction though, right? Right? Anyways guys, hey, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again really soon.